When the GPS malfunctioned, they thought it was just another equipment failure. But as Coast Guard officer Jake Morrison tried to fix their position manually, he spotted something that made his blood run cold. A ship that wasn't supposed to exist, in waters that were supposed to be empty. But if you want to see how this incredible discovery unfolds and changes everything Jake thought he knew about his job, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button to help more people discover these amazing stories of courage and mystery at sea. The morning sun cast long shadows across the deck of Coast Guard cutter Resolute as it cut through the choppy waters of the North Atlantic. Officer Jake Morrison, 26 years old and 3 years into his Coast Guard career, squinted at the GPS display with growing frustration. The screen flickered intermittently, showing their position one moment and displaying error messages the next. "Great," he muttered under his breath, tapping the side of the unit. "Not today." Petty Officer Sarah Chun looked over from her position at the helm. "GPS acting up again?" "Dead as a doornail," Jake replied, pulling out his navigation charts. "Guess we're doing this the old-fashioned way." Captain Rodriguez emerged from the wheelhouse, coffee mug in hand. "Problems, Morrison?" "GPS malfunction, sir. I'm plotting our position manually." Captain Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "Good man. Technology fails, but the fundamentals never do." Jake spread the chart across the navigation table, using his compass and the ship's instruments to triangulate their position. The process was methodical, requiring him to take bearings on landmarks and use dead reckoning to determine where they were in relation to their intended patrol route. As he worked, something caught his eye through the bridge windows. A shape on the horizon that shouldn't have been there. "Captain," Jake called, raising his binoculars. "There's something out there, about 2 miles northwest." Captain Rodriguez joined him at the windows, taking his own binoculars. "What are you seeing, son?" "Looks like a cargo vessel, sir. Big one." "But..." Jake adjusted the focus on his binoculars, his frown deepening. "It's not moving. No smoke from the stacks, no wake. Just sitting there." Petty Officer Chen had been monitoring radio frequencies. "Sir, I'm not picking up any distress signals. No radio chatter from that direction at all." Captain Rodriguez studied the distant vessel through his binoculars. From this distance, details were limited, but the ship appeared to be a large cargo freighter, possibly in the 400-foot range. Its dark hull contrasted sharply against the lighter ocean, and it sat with an unusual stillness that immediately raised questions. "Morrison, what's our current position?" the captain asked. Jake double-checked his calculations. "Approximately 41 degrees 15 minutes north, 70 degrees 30 minutes west, sir. That puts us in open shipping lanes." "Chun, check the maritime traffic database. See if there are any scheduled vessels in this area." Sarah Chen's fingers flew over her keyboard as she accessed the Coast Guard's maritime tracking system. After several minutes of searching, she looked up with confusion. "Nothing, sir. No scheduled traffic, no filed flight plans, no distress calls. According to the system, these waters should be empty." Captain Rodriguez lowered his binoculars, his expression thoughtful. "Interesting. Morrison, plot an intercept course. Let's take a closer look." As the Resolute changed heading toward the mysterious vessel, Jake continued his manual navigation work, but his attention was increasingly drawn to the ship ahead. Something about it felt wrong. Not just its unexpected presence, but something more fundamental. "Sir," Jake said, studying the vessel through his binoculars as they approached. "I don't see any crew on deck. No activity at all." The cargo ship loomed larger as they drew closer. Its hull was painted a dark blue, almost black, with rust stains running down from the waterline. The superstructure rose 7 stories above the main deck, with a bridge that showed no signs of occupancy. Most unsettling of all was the complete absence of any identification markings. "No name on the hull," Petty Officer Chen observed. "No port of registry, no IMO number. That's not legal." Every commercial vessel was required to display its name and International Maritime Organization number prominently on its hull. The absence of these markings suggested either a vessel in violation of international law or something more troubling. Captain Rodriguez had been in the Coast Guard for 22 years, and in that time he had seen smugglers, pirates, and vessels engaged in every form of maritime crime imaginable. But this felt different. The ship's complete stillness, its lack of identification, and its presence in waters that should have been empty created a combination that set off every alarm bell in his experienced mind. "Morrison, try raising them on radio," the captain ordered. "Standard maritime hail." Jake adjusted the radio frequency and spoke into the microphone. Unknown vessel at position 41 degrees 17 minutes north, 70 degrees 28 minutes west. This is United States Coast Guard Cutter Resolute. Please respond. Silenced. He tried again, varying the frequency. Unknown cargo vessel. This is Coast Guard Cutter Resolute. You are required to respond to our hail. Please identify yourself and state your intentions. Still nothing but static. As they drew within half a mile of the vessel, details became clearer and more disturbing. The cargo ship was enormous, easily 500 feet in length, with multiple crane systems and cargo holds that appeared to be sealed shut. But what caught Jake's attention was the condition of the ship itself. Despite sitting motionless in the water, there were no signs of distress. The vessel wasn't listing, there was no visible damage, and the paint, while weathered, wasn't in the deteriorated condition one would expect from an abandoned ship. It looked like it had been deliberately positioned and left. Captain, Sarah Chen called from her workstation. I've been running the ship's profile through our database. Nothing matches. Not in active registries, not in decommissioned vessels, not even in stolen ship reports. Captain Rodriguez made a decision. Prepare the boarding party. Morrison, you're with me. Chun, maintain position and radio contact. As they prepared the Zodiac boat for the short trip to the cargo vessel, Jake felt a knot forming in his stomach. His training had prepared him for drug interdictions, search and rescue operations, and standard maritime law enforcement. But this situation felt like stepping into unknown territory. The Zodiac cut through the swells toward the cargo ship's hull. Up close, the vessel was even more imposing. Its sides rose like a steel cliff, with a ladder system that extended down to just above the waterline. But what Jake noticed most was the complete silence. Even abandoned ships usually creaked and groaned as they moved with the waves. This ship was eerily quiet, as if it was somehow separate from the natural movement of the ocean around it. Morrison, Captain Rodriguez said as they approached the ladder. Document everything. Photos, observations, anything that seems unusual. Yes, sir. Jake activated his body camera and began taking pictures with his waterproof camera. Should I be looking for anything specific? In 22 years, I've never seen anything like this, the captain admitted. So I honestly don't know what we're going to find. They tied off the Zodiac and began climbing the ladder. The metal rungs were cold and slightly damp from sea spray, but they showed no signs of corrosion or neglect. As they reached the deck level, Jake hauled himself over the rail and got his first close look at the ship. The deck was clean. Not just relatively clean for an abandoned vessel, but spotless. The metal surfaces showed no accumulation of salt, grime, or organic matter that would be expected from a ship that had been at sea for any length of time. It was as if the vessel had been scrubbed down moments before their arrival. Captain, Jake whispered, this doesn't make sense. Look at this deck. Captain Rodriguez had noticed the same thing. Equipment looks maintained too. Those winches are clean. The cables are properly coiled. He gestured toward the cargo handling equipment. This ship isn't abandoned. They moved toward the superstructure, their footsteps echoing strangely in the silence. The cargo holds were sealed with heavy steel covers, and Jake noticed that the locking mechanisms appeared to be engaged from the inside. Sir, if this ship has been out here alone, how are the cargo holds locked from inside? Before Captain Rodriguez could answer, they heard a sound from somewhere within the ship's superstructure. Not mechanical, but organic. Footsteps. Both men froze, hands instinctively moving toward their service weapons. The footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, coming from what sounded like the bridge level several stories above them. Hello, Captain Rodriguez called out. This is the United States Coast Guard. Identify yourself. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. Jake and the captain exchanged glances, both understanding that they were no longer dealing with an abandoned vessel. Someone was aboard this ship, someone who had chosen not to respond to their radio hails, and was now aware of their presence. We're going up, Captain Rodriguez decided. Stay close, stay alert. They found an entrance to the superstructure and began climbing the internal stairs. The corridors were as clean and well-maintained as the deck had been. Emergency lighting provided adequate illumination, suggesting the ship's power systems were operational. As they climbed, Jake noticed details that continued to puzzle him. The ship was clearly designed for cargo transport, but the internal layout included features he had never seen on commercial vessels. Reinforced doors, security cameras in unexpected locations, and corridors that seemed wider than necessary. Captain, he whispered. "This doesn't look like a normal cargo ship." "I'm beginning to think it's not," Rodriguez replied. They reached the bridge level and found the door standing open. Inside, the bridge was fully operational. Lights glowed on control panels, radar screens displayed information, and navigation equipment hummed quietly. But there was no one there. Jake approached the ship's log, hoping to find information about the vessel's identity and purpose. The logbook was open to a recent entry, but the writing was in a language he didn't recognize. Not Spanish, not French, not any of the languages he had studied in his Coast Guard training. "Captain, can you read this?" Rodriguez examined the logbook, shaking his head. "Never seen anything like it. Could be cipher, could be a language I don't know." He photographed the pages with his camera. "Intelligence will want to see this." A sound from behind them made both men spin around. A man had entered the bridge, moving with complete silence until he chose to reveal himself. He was perhaps 60 years old, wearing civilian clothes that looked expensive but practical. His demeanor was calm, almost expectant, as if he had been waiting for them to arrive. "Gentlemen," the man said in perfect English with no discernible accent, "I apologize for not responding to your radio calls earlier. We were monitoring your approach." Captain Rodriguez kept his hand near his weapon. "Sir, I'm Captain Rodriguez, United States Coast Guard. I need to see your identification and documentation for this vessel." The man smiled slightly. "Of course, though I suspect you'll find the documentation challenging to verify through normal channels." He produced a passport from his jacket pocket and handed it to Captain Rodriguez. The passport appeared genuine, but the name and issuing country were ones Jake had never heard of. The photograph matched the man before them, but something about the document itself seemed unusual. "Mr. Captain Rodriguez studied the passport. Volkov, this passport is issued by a country that doesn't exist." "Doesn't exist currently," Volkov corrected gently, "but existed when the passport was issued. Geography can be fluid, Captain." Jake felt increasingly out of his depth. "Sir, what is this ship? Why isn't it in any registry?" Volkov regarded the young Coast Guard officer with what might have been amusement. "Officer Morrison, isn't it? Your manual navigation work was quite competent, by the way. Old skills are rarely practiced anymore." The fact that this stranger knew Jake's name sent a chill down his spine. "How do you know who I am?" "We've been observing your patrol patterns for several weeks," Volkov explained matter-of-factly. "Your ship passes through this area regularly, though usually your GPS functions properly." Captain Rodriguez stepped forward. "Sir, I need you to explain what this vessel is, what you're doing in these waters, and why you failed to respond to our radio hails." Volkov nodded, as if expecting these questions. "This ship, Captain, is the Meridian. It is, let's say, a research vessel. We study ocean currents, temperature variations, and marine life patterns that are of interest to various scientific communities." "Research vessel," Rodriguez repeated skeptically. "With sealed cargo holds and no identification markings?" "The nature of our research requires discretion," Volkov replied. "And certain materials we transport are sensitive to contamination. Hence the sealed holds." Jake had been studying the bridge equipment while the conversation continued. "Captain, this navigation gear is military grade, way beyond what any research vessel would need." Volkov's expression didn't change, but Jake caught a brief flicker of something in his eyes. "Approval, perhaps. You have a keen eye, Officer Morrison." "Yes. Our work occasionally requires precision navigation capabilities." "What kind of research?" Captain Rodriguez pressed. "The kind that requires government clearance to discuss," Volkov answered smoothly, "which I suspect you gentlemen don't possess." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the bridge. Two more men entered, both wearing similar civilian clothing, but moving with military precision. They positioned themselves near the doorway, not threatening, but clearly prepared for any eventuality. "Captain," one of the newcomers said to Volkov, the communication equipment, "has detected additional vessels approaching from the southeast." Jake and Captain Rodriguez exchanged glances. They hadn't radioed for backup, and no other Coast Guard vessels were scheduled to be in this area. "Ah," Volkov said, checking his watch. "Right on schedule." "Schedule for what?" Rodriguez demanded. "Captain, I'm going to suggest that you and Officer Morrison return to your vessel and continue your patrol," Volkov said, his tone remaining polite, but carrying an undertone of authority. "What you've stumbled upon here is part of an ongoing operation that requires discretion. We're not going anywhere until you provide proper documentation and explanation." Rodriguez replied firmly. Volkov sighed, reaching into another pocket of his jacket. He produced a different document, this one bearing official seals that Jake recognized as United States government markings. This authorizes the vessel Meridian to conduct operations in these waters without interference from local law enforcement, including Coast Guard patrols, Volkov explained, handing the document to Captain Rodriguez. Rodriguez examined the papers carefully, his expression shifting as he read. This is a real federal authorization, signed by someone very high up the chain. The operation we're conducting is legitimate, Captain. But it's also classified at levels that would require both of you to undergo security clearance investigations that would take months to complete. Jake looked between Volkov and his captain, trying to process what was happening. Sir, what exactly is this operation? Let's say we're recovering something that was lost a long time ago, Volkov replied. Something that various governments would prefer remained lost. The sound of approaching engines became audible from outside. Jake moved to the bridge windows and saw two more vessels approaching the Meridian. They appeared to be military ships, but flying no flags and bearing no identification markings. Captain, Jake said urgently, we've got company. Captain Rodriguez joined him at the window. The approaching vessels were clearly military in design, but their lack of identifying features was as troubling as the Meridian's anonymity. Mr. Volkov, Rodriguez said, his voice tight with tension. I need to understand what we've gotten involved in here. Nothing you need to be concerned about, Captain. Your patrol was routine. Your GPS malfunctioned. You investigated an unknown vessel as required by your duties, and you found everything in order. But everything isn't in order, Jake protested. This ship isn't registered. You're conducting some kind of classified operation, and now military vessels are showing up that don't officially exist either. Volkov studied Jake for a moment before responding. Officer Morrison, in your 3 years of service, how many times have you encountered situations that didn't quite fit the official narrative? Jake thought about it. A few times. Rescues that got classified afterward, vessels that disappeared from reports, people who claimed to be civilians, but moved like military. And what did you do in those situations? Followed orders. Wrote reports that focused on the facts I could verify. Exactly, Volkov nodded. Because you understand that some operations require compartmentalization. Some truths are too complex for public consumption. The military vessels had drawn alongside the Meridian, and Jake could see personnel moving between the ships using boarding bridges that had been deployed with remarkable efficiency. The entire operation was clearly choreographed and planned. This has been going on for a while, Jake realized. This isn't a chance encounter. Very perceptive, Volkov acknowledged. The Meridian has been conducting operations in these waters for several months. Your patrol route was factored into our planning. Captain Rodriguez's radio crackled to life. Coast Guard Cutter Resolute, this is Coast Guard District Command. Please respond. Rodriguez keyed his radio. District Command, this is Resolute. We are conducting routine patrol operations. Resolute, you are directed to resume your scheduled patrol route immediately. Do not approach or investigate any vessels in your current area of operation. The order was crystal clear, and it had come from well above Captain Rodriguez's pay grade. Someone with significant authority had been monitoring their position and had decided to intervene. Understood, District Command. Resolute is resuming patrol route. Volkov smiled. As I said, Captain, some operations require discretion. Jake felt a mixture of frustration and fascination. Sir, what happens if we report this? You'll report exactly what you observed, Volkov replied. An unidentified vessel that was subsequently verified as authorized by federal agencies. Your GPS malfunctioned, you investigated properly, and you found no violations of maritime law. But that's not the whole truth. Officer Morrison, the whole truth includes classified operations, international agreements, and political considerations that are far above both our clearance levels, Volkov explained patiently. Your job is to enforce maritime law and ensure the safety of these waters. This operation threatens neither. Captain Rodriguez had been studying the authorization documents again. These signatures, I recognize some of these names. This goes very high up. High enough that your careers would benefit from discretion rather than curiosity. Volkov confirmed that the military vessels continued their operations around the Meridian. Jake watched through the bridge windows. Personnel moved with practiced efficiency, transferring equipment and materials between the ships. Whatever they were doing, it was clearly important and highly organized. Mr. Volkov, Jake said, Can you at least tell us if this operation poses any threat to civilian shipping or coastal communities? Volkov considered the question carefully. Quite the opposite, Officer Morrison. What we're doing here prevents threats from reaching civilian populations. Prevents how? By recovering things that should never have been lost in the first place. The cryptic answer only raised more questions, but Jake could see that Volkov was unlikely to provide more specific information. Captain Rodriguez had reached the same conclusion. "Gentlemen," the captain said, "it appears our presence here is no longer required." They made their way back to the main deck, where their Zodiacs still waited alongside the Meridian. As they prepared to depart, Volkov accompanied them. "Officer Morrison," he said as Jake climbed down toward the Zodiac, "your navigation skills are impressive. Have you ever considered advancing your education? Opportunities exist for young officers with your particular combination of skills and discretion." Jake paused on the ladder. "What kind of opportunities?" "The kind that would make full use of your talents," Volkov replied, "and provide answers to the questions you're asking today." "Is that an offer?" "It's a suggestion that you consider your options carefully. Your captain can provide you with contact information if you're interested." Captain Rodriguez and Jake returned to the Resolute in thoughtful silence. As they pulled away from the Meridian, Jake watched the mysterious vessel shrink in the distance. The military ships continued their operations, but from this distance, details were impossible to make out. "Captain," Jake said as they reached their own ship, "what do we do with this?" "We write an accurate report," Rodriguez replied. "GPS malfunction, investigated unknown vessel, found authorized federal operation in progress, resumed patrol." "That's it." "That's enough, Morrison. Sometimes knowing when not to ask questions is as important as knowing when to ask them." Back aboard the Resolute, Jake completed his manual navigation work and got the GPS system working again. Their position was exactly where his calculations had indicated, confirming both his skills and the accuracy of his observations. As he updated the ship's log, Jake found himself thinking about Volkov's words. Opportunities for young officers with particular skills. What had the man seen in their brief interaction that suggested Jake might be suitable for whatever organization operated ships like the Meridian? 2 days later, back at the Coast Guard base, Jake was completing paperwork when an envelope appeared on his desk. No return address, no postmark, just his name written in precise handwriting. Inside was a business card with no company name, just a phone number and the words "Advanced Maritime Services." Jake stared at the card for a long time before placing it in his wallet. He had a choice to make. Continue his current career path, serving honorably in the Coast Guard with the satisfaction of protecting coastal waters and saving lives, or explore the mysterious opportunity that Volkov had presented. 3 weeks passed before Jake made his decision. The memory of the Meridian and its implications had remained with him constantly. The knowledge that there were operations happening beyond the official narrative, that there were threats being addressed that the public never heard about, and that his particular skills might be valuable in that hidden world. He dialed the number on the business card during his lunch break, expecting to reach an answering service or automated system. Instead, a familiar voice answered immediately. "Officer Morrison," Volkov said, as if he had been expecting the call. "I wondered how long it would take you to decide." "How did you know I would call?" "Because men like you don't ignore questions once they've been asked. The GPS malfunction was fortunate for both of us." "Was it a malfunction?" Jake asked. Volkov's chuckle was barely audible through the phone. "Does it matter? What matters is that you demonstrated exactly the qualities we look for. Competence under pressure, curiosity tempered by discretion, and the ability to see beyond the obvious. What happens if I say yes? You'll learn what was in those cargo holds. You'll understand what threats exist that the public doesn't know about. And you'll have the opportunity to prevent those threats from reaching people who can't protect themselves." Jake looked around the Coast Guard station, at his colleagues going about their daily routines, protecting waters and saving lives in ways that would be recognized and celebrated. Then he thought about the Meridian, about operations that happened in shadows, about threats prevented by people whose names would never be known. "I need to think about it," he said finally. "Of course. But don't think too long, Officer Morrison. The world doesn't pause for contemplation." The line went dead. Jake sat in his office, the business card still in his hand, facing a decision that would define the rest of his career. Continue serving in the light, with honor and recognition, or step into the shadows where the real threats might be waiting. Outside his window, Coast Guard vessels continued their patrols, maintaining the visible security that the public relied upon. But somewhere beyond the horizon, Jake knew, the Meridian and ships like it were conducting operations that the world would never hear about. Operations that might be more important than anything happening in the daylight. The choice was his to make.